Hey everybody, my name is Luke Voley. I'm here with Mike DeSiglio, and we are industrial designers here at 52 Launch. And we're just kind of gonna run through some of the things we do here on a day-to-day basis, and maybe a little bit about what the process would be like if you sign up as a 52 Launch client. Um, I think before we kind of get into the process, I think Mike has a good idea of maybe let's just explain what an industrial designer is. I think that would help a lot of people and a lot of potential clients. So I'm going to let Mike take the
Sure.
floor on that one.
The main job of an industrial designer is to design products and objects and devices and even experiences that millions of people interact with every day. So we focus on the aesthetics of the object, we focus on the functionality, um, as well as manufacturability. So whatever we design is ultimately going to have to be manufactured. So
Yeah.
it's pretty important. We focus on ergonomics and also the end user's experience and a whole bunch of other things too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, there's a big misconception between industrial designers and engineers. Obviously, designers in their field know the differences, but to the layman, a industrial designer kind of makes it look nice, and an engineer makes it work. Now, that's not to be said that we're not going to design anything that won't work. But at the same time, it's mostly on the engineer's side of things to really kind of make sure it's manufacturable, make sure the drafts are right, functions the way it wants, and everything like that. The majority of our engineers are uh, overseas. They usually our engineers are kind of mingled in with our suppliers, and that's kind of the reason that we really work with a lot of overseas engineers is because most of our different suppliers have their own specific engineers. There's a tooling engineer. Those are for injection molded parts, and each factory kind of likes to do it their own way. Some might like to have larger drafts than others, and it's just kind of dependent on their machines and how they find that their tools work the best. Most of the process here is that we'll design something and then we'll send it over, and we'll get what's called a DFM. That stands for Design for Manufacturing. But actually, before I kind of dive into that, let me back up a little bit, and I'll kind of start with the process of what it would be like if you sign up as a 52 launch client.
Yeah, sounds
DFM is
good.
part of that process, but it's a little bit ways down the road. Kind of the first thing that we would do from a design standpoint is design iteration. So let's say you came to us with just a napkin sketch. We would do a full design iteration packet. So that is kind of we like to start very broad with our design and kind of narrow it down. So we really we want to be able to find the direction that you like, the direction that we like, and kind of have a happy medium between it. Ideally, it's the same, but it differs. And that design iteration can get, that can span anywhere from 1 week to 2 months. It really just kind of is dependent on how fast we get through that, and you know uh, how close we are on our first iterations. The biggest thing to really note is that like most designers, especially in the beginning of iterating, we want full and complete honesty, because we don't want you to tell us that you love a design, and then a month down the road, once we've already done the CAD model, done everything like that, now you're having second thoughts. So we really want to make sure that we are right in line right in the beginning. So we want to know if you hate it, we want to know if you love it, and everything in between. um,
Yeah, and we during the early design phase, we work very closely with our clients, and I think part of the initial ideation iteration phase is really trying to flush out what exactly that idea, what that product, what that concept is. A lot of times people will come to us with what they think they have a completely flushed out idea, but in reality it needs a little bit of tweaking, a little push and pull, a little give and take from
yep.
us and them, and together we make something really awesome.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, and it really kind of depends on the client that comes in the door. Some of them come in with a napkin sketch. Some of them come in with a full fledged product. Obviously the ones that have CAD models and already have a design firm that worked on it and things like that don't necessarily need to begin with that design iteration. Um, what we would usually begin with is creating it in our 3D program. Um, so that is kind of the next step. Is that once we've on paper, once we've kind of finalized the design and we're happy on both ends, we move into our CAD program. We use a program called Onshape. It's actually the founder of SolidWorks left SolidWorks and created Onshape, so it's really great. It's actually web based, so it's really great for showing clients products, and we can send links that you can digitally or like virtually see the product, view it, turn it around, measure it, everything like that. So it's really great. Um, and once we've once we've built it in CAD, and we have a couple designers here, Mike, myself, and a couple other that are capable of that, then we do what's called renders. So we use a program called Keyshot. We throw it into Keyshot, and we do a bunch of renders. And Mike can kind of talk a little bit more about renders and the purpose of them.
Yeah. So when we build our 3D model in the computer, we use, like Luke said, Onshape, a CAD program. You can kind of think of it as like sculpting without using clay or wood or foam or whatever else you might. So we have this 3D object in the computer. We can turn it around, see it. But it's usually gray and pretty boring. So we spend a little bit of time rendering it, which is kind of like putting it in a virtual photo studio. So we can do different lights and effects, different colors, materials, textures, and it really brings the product to life. A lot of times you can't even tell if it is a render or an actual photograph of the product. So it can really give the client a good understanding of what this thing might look like when we're done.
Yeah.
Sometimes though, if it's the type of product that you're going to be interacting with a lot, you're going to hold it in your hands, maybe it has handles and things like that, we'll sometimes go and make a low resolution model first, which is basically, maybe we'll carve it out of a block of wood or make it out of foam core. And it's really just to get an idea of sizing, scale, how exactly you're going to interact with it. And then once we do have the 3D model, we have the option to 3D print it. So we have several 3D printers here for all different types of applications. And it's at that point where the client can really get our design of their idea in hand and start moving it around, see what the interaction is going to be like.
Yeah, I'd say that once it's made in 3D and we do the renders, we do the prints, that's when it really kind of comes to life for the client. That's when they see that their vision, their baby they've been working on for a long time, they can see it in their hands. They, see the materials that it's going to be, and it comes to life, which is really exciting. And essentially, once we have completed that section of it, then begins the hard work. Then begins actually manufacturing it. So the way that process begins is with what's called an NPI. That stands for New Product Introduction. Essentially what that is a packet that's an overview of your product. So that includes material specs, packaging callouts, quantities, 2D drawings, like an overview of the function. And the reason that we make a packet like that is so that way we can send that to a majority of our partners overseas and domestically. The last thing we want to do is kind of put all of our eggs in one basket and only be talking to one supplier. We want to get feedback, quotes, and all sorts of things from, a majority of different suppliers. And we can really kind of compare and make sure that we have the right partner that we're moving forward with. And usually what comes after that NPI from our suppliers is kind of going back to it is what's called a DFM. And that stands for Design for Manufacturing. And that is really a kind of, feedback from our suppliers or engineers on the most cost-effective way to make your product. So whether it is, maybe there's a couple items that we can do stock, maybe we should be making an item out of plastic instead of metal and molding it, things like that. That's really kind of, where our engineers step in and give us the advice on, the most cost-effective way to make it. Usually with that DFM also comes our initial price quote. Obviously that DFM process is usually one of the longest in our design process, and rightfully so, because the last thing we want to do is make a product incorrectly, not necessarily incorrectly, but potentially making a product for more than it should be. And that really comes down to just building the right partner, making sure you have the right partner, and making sure you have the right engineering team behind you. That DFM process is sometimes brutal, Sometimes it's quick and easy. It all depends on the product. If you have a very complex product with a lot of moving parts, a lot of electronics, things like that, that DFM process takes a lot longer. If you have a simple injection molded part, it really just to be about a couple of draft angles and things like that, and then you can call it a day. But after the DFM comes our initial price quote, and once we get that price quote in, then it's kind of really a numbers game on making sure that the price is right and we can still sell it for a good margin, and you guys can still make money and everything like that. Um, and yeah, yeah. I mean I threw a lot at you there, but that's the beginning section of our design phase. And obviously once we get a quote in and we hit go on production, that's when the actual work starts. That's when the tooling begins, when the actual product is being made and everything like that. And that whole process goes simultaneously with our graphic side for logos, branding, packaging, everything like that, because we want to have a full-fledged package done by the time the tooling is completed, and that way we can get a full-fledged sample in. Um, so, I mean, I think one thing we could talk about is the actual sampling process,
Yeah.
because that is, one thing that we've, had some back and forth with a lot of clients, and it seems like something that, is beneficial for our clients to better understand. Um, so there's a big difference between a sample that we can make in-house and a sample that our supplier can make. We have a PLA printer and a resin printer, so we can do pretty high-end, pretty high-quality stuff, but we don't have a metal shop, we don't have a metal lathe, we don't have a CNC. So as far as functioning prototypes, sometimes they can get a little far-fetched in-house. We could make things, what we call a look-like model. We could do that all day in-house and, get something in your hands that's the same size, same shape, everything like that, looks good, but it just doesn't work the exact way we want. If we want something that, functions the exact way we want without paying for a tool, which we always recommend we get a sample in before we, move forward on a tool, that's when we really kind of look to our overseas partners, because they have those capabilities and they can pretty much give us a completely functioning sample of pretty much anything from electronics, metal, plastic, before any tooling is done. Um, so, it really kind of depends on how confident we are in the product. If it's something that we don't foresee any major issues, then usually we can, just do a 3D print in-house and just move right forward with it. The majority of our products are not that simple, and they require a, much more detailed sample and everything like that before we move forward on the tool. So, it's kind of the biggest difference to know is like a prototype versus a sample. What we make in-house and everything like that before a tooling is more so a prototype than a sample. Obviously it can be called sample, but there is a big difference. A prototype is something that is, like I said, kind of like a looks like model, something that, potentially functions the way we want it to, but is more so, just something that you can get in your hands to make sure the sizing is right and everything like that, and the aesthetics are right. A sample is more something like what we would call an FA sample, final approval sample. That comes once you have finished the tooling, you get what's called an FA sample. So, tooling usually takes about 4 to 5 weeks. And the first thing they do after a tool is what they call a T0 sample. That stands for trial zero sample. So that is normally just a plastic piece shot right out of the mold. That's whatever color they have available. Usually it's white or black. And that's really just to kind of test the mold, make sure that it works the way we want to, it looks the way we want to. And then they'll create a T1, trial 1 sample. And if that looks good, and usually we don't necessarily get our trial 1 sample sent to us, usually we can just approve that through photos and videos. And if that looks good, then they move on to the FA sample. And that FA sample is what we get sent to us. That is something and that's why we want to have the packaging done before that. That's something that we expect to come over here that should be the same that a consumer will get when they buy your product. So it'll have, fully packaged, kind of the whole 9 yards. It will be your final product. And that FA sample is really the last point to make any changes. Because if we approve that FA sample, then they're going to start mass production and they're going to, start making your product. So that FA sample is really kind of the last stop to make any adjustments or changes that we want. And Yeah, I mean that's a quick rundown of the sampling process. It really kind of depends on your product, on the timeline of that as well. But yeah, yeah,
Yeah, sounds good.
yeah.
Do you want to go into a little bit more depth about the design process at the very beginning? I know we kind of touched on
Sure.
that, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think it'd be cool to talk about. It is, I mean, obviously it's our favorite part, but I really do think the clients enjoy it. I do think it's one of the most fun parts because you get to see all kinds of different drawings and sketches, and yeah, it's just fun,
Hmm.
creative.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Like I said, with that initial design iteration, we start very broad. We want to start super funky, super crazy, a lot of wild drawings. And that way we can kind of hone in on the direction that you guys are trying to go with.
Yeah,
um, yeah, and most of those initial design iterations are pen and paper. Once we've kind of narrowed down a design aesthetic direction, then we move on to some iPad color sketches, things like that.
yeah.
um,
And through this entire process too, we really like to include the client, treat the client as part of the design team because they truly are. So
mhm.
what that means is early on we're doing all these sketches, we'll lay them out on a table, have our clients come in and review them with us. You can pick up the sketches, draw on top of them, see what works, see what doesn't work, what you like, what you don't like, new ideas, old ideas,
Yeah, yeah,
whatever kind of works.
yeah, for sure. um, yeah, it definitely it's like I said before, that process really can vary on the length of it. For instance, we have a project coming up that is extremely complex that probably will have a total of 50 to 60 different parts on it.
And
and-
all of which have to be designed with the same consideration,
Yeah.
time,
so
aesthetic.
something like that is that's probably a month and a half to 2 month design iteration process. Whereas our simpler products that are either a one part product, a 2 part product, those can move a lot faster.
Absolutely.
um,
Yeah. And it also depends on what people come in with. Sometimes people come in with literally nothing more than an idea.
mhm.
I would like something that does XYZ, which is cool. We love that. We have all kinds of freedom. But what it does mean is, when pen hits paper, there are all kinds of things. And part of our job is to weed through our ideas and try to align with what the client's vision
Yeah,
is.
yeah, and
Sometimes they'll come in with a prototype. We've had people come in with 2x4s with other things nailed to it, which is super cool. It's super awesome to see those, and it gives us, a little bit of confirmation that the idea works to some capacity. But then what that means is we have to take whatever functionality is or isn't in that prototype that's been created and turn it into something that doesn't look like a 2x4.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we pay a lot of attention to aesthetics, and it's really important to us that we're designing product that the end user will have an emotional attachment to, just purely from an aesthetic standpoint, something that will jump off of a store shelf or jump off of a web page, or something that you look at and then take a second look at because it does something for you.
Yeah, yeah. And that being said, you know, we are a client-based company. So if you come to us with an exact design direction that you want, then that's what we're going to follow.
Yeah, for sure.
Obviously, sometimes people come to us with, and just let us run free, which is great. And then other times, people come to us with a, full-fledged idea and a full-fledged design direction that they want to stay in, which is fine, obviously, as well. So it really just kind of depends there. But yeah.
And I think another thing that sometimes isn't as considered, sometimes gets overlooked, is what the design aesthetic and the form language all needs to encapsulate is your brand and your identity. So what we design in some way truly does represent what you and your company are. So we definitely don't take that lightly. Whether that's through form language, hard edges, soft edges, sleek, maybe a bit brutal, whatever aesthetic we think help illustrate what what the direction of your company is. And we like to push design too. We like to be forward thinking, forward facing. How's this product going to age in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Like let's design it so it's beautiful 50 years from now, and it's desirable enough that people still keep it in their homes decades from now. We definitely don't like to design things that get thrown away. That
For sure, yeah,
definitely hurts a little bit.
Design process is probably one of the most important parts of creating a new product, because if you don't design something that works well and looks good and people want to buy it, then you don't really have anything to sell. So
That's true. That's true.
yeah,
That's a total fail, which we don't do here.
yeah,
We have hiccups, but there's always a solution. There's always a design workaround, and
for sure.
it always comes out awesome.
And that's why, like I said earlier, that's why the DFM process is so important and sometimes takes the longest, because I mean, we've gotten better at it as the years go on, and I think we do it less and less now, but there are times where we fall in love with a design and then we bring it to our manufacturers and it can't be made. And obviously that's something that we take into account right from the beginning. So we try to make sure that doesn't happen as much as possible. But there are just like some things that we have are we're super excited about, and maybe get a little lost in the design aspect of it, and don't think about the manufacturing side of it. And then we bring it to our engineers, and they rip it apart. So it really just kind of, we always try to take that into account. And honestly, one thing that we always have to, take into account as well in the design phase is kind of what we envision this selling for. If a product plans on selling for $200 compared to $20, that's a major difference in how it has to be designed. What materials we have to use, and what processes we have to use. So it really is, there's a lot of design constraints there, and price is a very big one, because obviously most people don't come to us to just have us design them a product and walk away. We want to make a business for them, so that kind of stems from being able to sell the product. And if it's not at the right price and not made for the right price, then you're not going to make any money on it, and there's really no point in doing it. So definitely that's a major aspect, is kind of what are we envisioning this cost going to be.
And that's usually something and again, it always varies client to client, product to product, but usually when someone comes in, they have a vague idea of what they want this product to retail for. And sometimes it's totally feasible, but sometimes we have to work with our clients and help figure out what product might fit into a certain price point. Sometimes there are big dreams that want to fit into a small price point that can't always be done, but there are always ways. We could raise the price point, we can design things in a different manner so that we do hit the price point. And like Luke was saying, that all totally falls in the DFM stage. Another thing that I think is very important to touch on is when we design product, the client doesn't just have to, I guess, buy our finished design from wherever our suppliers are. In order to make that finished design, we touched on it a little bit earlier, there's usually tooling costs associated. And basically what tooling costs are, when you injection mold something or make something out of really any material, there has to be some kind of jig or rig put together. So when you scale this up to mass production, they can make thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of these pieces the same every time. It'd be one thing to have a craftsman make a beautiful product one time out of a piece of wood, right? But in order to make that one thing the same way every single time, there's usually fixtures and jigs and tools that our suppliers need to create with us to make sure the product comes out right. And of course, because those are all bespoke pieces that need to be built to make the product, there's always a cost associated with them. And so we are very sensitive to that too. Sometimes we have clients that have a pretty good sized budget and are willing to spend money on tooling to have the product be exactly what they want, exactly what they envision. Sometimes sometimes the resources aren't quite there. So we take that in mind, and we can design around that too and create something just as awesome, but
Yeah, I think,
more in someone's price
to that
range.
point, that's kind of one of the greatest things about 52 Launch is that, we really can kind of make it work for any budget. If you come to us and you say, I have no money for tooling, then, that's okay. That means that we are pretty much just going to be modifying a stock product out there. And it really is kind of a give and take there, because if you're buying a stock product and modifying it, you're usually paying a higher per piece price than if you tool something and make it custom yourself. So it really kind of depends on the client's budget, on kind of how we make it. I think I think that kind of leads into a good segue of like maybe talking about domestic versus overseas
Yeah.
suppliers. That's one thing that we kind of have been dealing with for a really long time, and me and Mike actually just last week went to a the Design to Part show down in Connecticut. um, and we met a lot of really great domestic manufacturers. We usually quote most of our projects domestically and overseas, just to kind of compare costs. I would say that overseas is definitely more competitive when it comes to tooling and labor. But I think we're seeing a bit of a shift to domestic suppliers, kind of trying to win more business. I think a lot of it is because shipping rates right now are pretty high coming from overseas, and I think more and more people are just trying to make things in the U.S. I think where we have found the biggest discrepancy, I think the tooling and the per piece price can be somewhat comparable. I mean, obviously tooling is always a little bit less overseas, but we've also worked with domestic suppliers that get their tools overseas, bring them over here, and then make it in the U.S., which is a great way to go too. Really, the biggest difference is labor. The labor cost overseas is a lot less than the labor cost here in the U.S. So if your product requires a decent amount of assembly, that's when it's really going to be hard to make it in the US. If it is, if your product is a simple one piece, two piece injection molded piece of plastic, then that's a no brainer. We want to stay here in the US. We don't have to pay for shipping. We don't have to pay for tariffs. It can save you a lot of money. But it's really kind of when you get into those items of, 5, 6, 10 part assemblies is kind of when, domestic suppliers price themselves out. I think ideally we want to be staying here in the US as much as we can. We would rather be able to take a car ride and go see our production and go see our tool and everything like that, rather than a 16-hour flight. So, definitely it's interesting. And I think it is, more and more getting more accessible. And I think that's, like, as we talked to a couple suppliers at the show, that they are more and more willing now to do assembly and to work out with their clients, and figuring out a cost-effective way to make it happen in the US.
Yeah, and it also feels really good to have a product designed, engineered, and produced all in the U.S. There's something absolutely to be said about that. And I think because the reasons you stated, very few products are like that. We also like it too because our suppliers in the U.S. are awake and sleep the same time we do. When we go overseas, we're on opposite schedules, so sometimes it's pretty late nights for us, or early mornings for them. So we sleep better knowing things are made in the U.S.
For sure. Yeah. And like I said, it's a lot easier if a problem arises if it's in the US. If there's a problem with the tool, that is easier to just have a meeting and visually talk about it with the tool manufacturer. It's a lot easier to do face to face than it is a video chat across the world. So that definitely makes a big difference. And we're kind of always looking to expand and always looking for partners in the US. And I think we have a potential few. We've been doing more and more in the US, and not to say that our overseas suppliers are low quality or anything like that. We work with the best over there for sure. Our main liaison between us and our suppliers overseas has been in the business for 45, 50 years now. So we really we have a lot of respect over there as a company. And we get treated really well. I think one thing to touch on too, with a lot of the overseas suppliers, is that a majority of them, if you were to just go by yourself kind of to Alibaba or to any of these websites and try to find a manufacturer, it's really all about quantity for them. That most suppliers won't take a tiny order right off the street, and that's just because they have bigger fish to fry. They are super busy, and 1,000-piece order just isn't worth it to them. One thing that our relationships has done is that because we have a full marketing team, that once your product lands, we sell it. we place reorders, and our suppliers, have gotten reorders from us, and they see that, so they're willing to, not make much money, if any, on our first initial orders of small quantities for the, potential of larger orders down the road. And we've had a lot of really successful clients that we've been able to persuade our factory to take a really small order to start. We've got the product here, we've marketed it well, we sold it, gotten a reorder, and now we're all moving. So definitely it works out.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really good point that kind of differentiates us at 52 from other places. If we were, say, like an average sized design firm and taking on more corporate type clients, you can go to different types of factories because you're placing large quantity orders. But for your average guy or gal that's just trying to start up, it's scary, it's difficult.
Yeah.
To put up the money to order 10,000, 100,000 pieces is honestly not feasible. It really isn't. But because of we're very lucky to have these long-standing business relationships, and our suppliers know to take a chance on us, and we know which clients to take a chance on, so it all just kind of works out great. A few of our suppliers even will do like 500 to 1,000 piece orders, which is really unheard of. That's almost doesn't count as mass production at that point. But,
and I think another large perk for our overseas suppliers compared to domestic is the engineering side of things. We get a lot of free engineering done overseas just because of our relationships and because of our past business. If you were to do a decent amount of PCB electrical work here in the US, it would cost you an arm and a leg, whereas in overseas it really is, sometimes they kind of do it pro bono, to say, kind of just they do a lot of the engineering work hoping that they're going to get an order. And we always try to repay that favor when we can. If they do a lot of engineering work at no cost to us, then we're going to try to place an order with them. So
I think the other part of it is our products are cool and exciting, and they're just kind of different, and I think of a lot of we have fantastic relationships, like we were saying, with our suppliers, and it's we enjoy working with them, and they enjoy working with us, and it's just just kind of a feel good all the way around. So we like to make cool things happen.
I mean, and that's not to say that in all manufacturing problems arise. That's just the nature of the business. You're going to get a sample in that's not what you expected, that doesn't work the way you want, and you either just have to kind of work through it or pivot. And that's kind of, I think, one thing that we're really good at, because I think we've seen it all here. So something that we might get a sample in that might make a normal client kind of pull their hair out and get really nervous and whatnot. But for us, that's a normal Tuesday. We do that every day. So, I think just our experience there helps a lot with the design aspect of it.
Absolutely. So maybe a little bit of a different topic, but I know it's something that both Luke and I feel very strongly about, is sustainability, and just kind of how all of this ties back. We've been talking a lot about injection molding plastic pieces. So how can we be sustainable today and environmentally conscious and all those things? Yeah,
it's definitely I think that's something that we try to push for every single one of our products. It really comes down to cost. Unfortunately, sometimes we just can't afford the recycled material and things like that. I think hopefully we'll get to a point where that recycled material is the same cost, if not cheaper, than your normal ABS plastic. But at the moment we're not quite there. Now we have some clients who are all about sustainability, and that's what we move forward with, and we love doing that. It really just kind of comes down to what we can afford and what fits the product the best.
Absolutely. And I also think maybe it's not a misconception, but I think when people think about sustainable products, specifically if it's of the injection molded plastic variety, that they are not sustainable. And I think inherently they aren't, for sure. You're bringing in tons of new plastic into the world, but there is a way in which you can make injection molded parts be sustainable and environmentally friendly. One way in which is the packaging. So we pretty much exclusively do paper pulp, paper type packaging, not none of like the PET plastic blister packs.
Yeah.
And that's one thing, the packages are fully recyclable and a relatively small carbon footprint and things like that. Because, with the packaging, that for sure is something that's going to be discarded. And the nature of it is you need to be able to bring a product from one point to another, and it's got to be packed in some way.
Yeah.
That being said, we have an awesome graphics team that does our packaging, and they're also very conscious about this. So sometimes just less is more. Keep it as simple as possible. Use
I think
least amount of material.
I think we could save the sustainability manufacturing for another podcast, because we could talk about that for a long time. But
absolutely.
I think that's it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast, and please like and subscribe.
Thanks.